Last week, why blank one? I'm David Bloomberg, and with me as we wrap up this season of Big Brother is, of course, my co-host, the man who predicted Taylor's win in our preseason podcast, Ovi Kabir.
Hello, hello, hello. So happy to be here. And yes, for the real fans out there who've been watching our podcast week in and week out, you know I made my predictions for Taylor Hale before we even saw the season, the show, just based on cast assessments. And the reason why I'm wearing this shirt is because I wore it about 3 months ago when I made that assessment. So this has been dubbed my lucky shirt. So should have brought it in the Big Brother house with me, but unfortunately I did not. So because it has some winter blood on it. But no, super happy. I think I feel very fulfilled to be able to like talk about this whole season as a whole as we've gone through the whole thing. And it's really interesting how we talk about why these last two evictees don't go home. Well, essentially, I guess they do go home.
At some point, they'll go home, you know.
At some point.
Yeah. I mean, Taylor was supposed to be voted out first. Instead, she came in first.
Exactly. I mean, insane. But also, I have to give you props, David, because you had a valiant effort with Britney, from who we thought would go out week 2, maybe to Final 4.
Yeah. Hey, better than my usual picks, right?
Exactly.
But now I have to strive to, to catch up to you. First time coming on as co-host, and you're like, boom, there it is. Now it's all downhill from here.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be hard to repeat this, but hopefully during we'll get another season during the Christmas time, so we can do it all over again.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that as that first week was unfolding, it looked like Taylor was going to be railroaded out the door. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to figure out what we're going to say on the podcast. It was not looking to be an auspicious start because it was like, okay, what did she do wrong? She walked in. I don't think I'd ever seen anything quite like it. So thankfully that didn't happen, not just because it would have been a difficult podcast. But I also want to remind everyone, just in case, because I've still seen this a little online, is that, we've been saying since the very beginning that the backstage twist would have almost certainly meant Taylor was not getting voted out that first week anyway, even if Paloma self-evicting hadn't happened, because she did so well in the comp that they would have been competing.
Yeah, I think we would have seen a reality where Alyssa went home, and that still would change the game somewhat, and we probably would have seen a completely different game from Kyle, and who knows where that would have left the leftovers. I mean, it's cool to think the butterfly effect,
right?
Danny Darko, if you ever watched that, basically the whole effect that we saw, but the result is the same right now. Taylor won, and I'm actually kind of glad we never had to do a recap episode of why she lost, because I was really trying to bring out notes to figure out which ways to do it. It was becoming difficult because she and these final 3 people were in really good position. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, she started out at, a terrible disadvantage, having nothing to do with anything she did. People were bashing her, making things up about her, talking about her behind her back. They did this based on literally nothing, such as when Daniel said on like day 2, she's going to blow up if she's nominated. And as we've seen over the past 80 something days, that is exactly the opposite of her personality. But as she ended up doing multiple times through the season, she got up, dusted herself off, kept on going. And we'll obviously discuss more of what she did later. But, just the fact that she never quit and never gave in is somewhat amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, this is why I love this podcast, why we love covering it, because we break down the game of it. And I was worried about if she went home in the first pre-jury segment, there wasn't much game to talk about because she was kind of surviving. And so what we saw post the jury segment, she essentially was really kind of finding her own, really playing the social game, making certain moves. And now we had a lot of game strategy to talk about. And so I think what's really exciting is that we saw very different levels of gameplay in these last final 2 and potentially final 3 people.
Yeah. Now, of course, as regular listeners know, we had predicted Taylor would win, not just when you did at the beginning, but over the course of the last 2 podcasts. But I also admitted that some of that was hope, not just what I thought would happen. And then I got to tell you, as the finale was drawing nearer, I started to doubt it. Then the producers showed us that horribly misleading jury roundtable segment,
Mm-hmm.
and I grew more concerned. And but even then, I still kept telling myself she's going to get the women and Michael at the very least, just based on what we saw. So she should be okay. She should be okay. I just kept saying that. I certainly didn't expect 8-1.
I didn't expect it either. I mean, we talked about a lot of combinations. I mean, I believe we broke it down almost every combination between Turner, Monty,
Mm-hmm.
Taylor, Turner, etc. And I mean, I even argued that I felt like maybe Turner might have had a certain chance, but seeing as it, anybody who went to the end against Taylor, it would have been a 8-1 to 9-0 flush.
Yeah.
I think it would have been quite interesting to see maybe the Monte Turner split. I still think I have an idea of where it would have gone now, but
Oh, we'll
it was.
talk about that in a minute here because Julie thinks she has a thought on it too. And
Oh yeah.
but before we get to that, we know Taylor won and we're happy about it, but we still need to figure out why, along with discussing the games of Monte and Turner. We will follow our usual path here of looking at all the information about the final three from TV, live feeds, interviews, etc., and then comparing their game to a set of guiding rules I originally wrote in 2004 and have modified since. Anyone who at this late stage wants to check out the most recent version, it's at robhasawebsite.com/bigbrotherrules. Now, when Monty and Turner kept emphasizing their comp wins, I was thinking about the rules in terms of how I don't put that emphasis in there because, as I said in the Why Britney Lost podcast, the whole point of the rules are to put you in a good position so you don't need to be winning everything. And, Taylor winning the season really brought that back into focus and emphasized how comps can
Mhm.
certainly be important, but they are not the end all be all of the game of Big Brother.
It's a very holistic overall game. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
similar to Survivor, where you have to outlast, outwit, outplay them. There's elements of that in Big Brother, where there's so many different combinations. And I think Taylor really talked about that in her jury speech and throughout her game, where she
Mm-hmm.
embodied not just one of those qualities, but more of them. And I would also argue Monty embodied a lot of those qualities, but for whatever reason, he focused only on the competition prowess he had, and he thought that might be the way to go. Unfortunately, though, I think the idea was that the jury didn't want to give the same type of winner over and
Right.
over again.
Right. Yeah. I definitely will have some comments about his inside the box thinking
Mhm.
there. But before we get to the rules, we usually have some other things to discuss. In this case, there hasn't been a whole lot that happened since we talked about why Britney lost. I mean, normally when it gets to final three, there isn't a whole lot to talk about. There were a few more instances of Monty being a clueless jerk to and about Taylor, but I think we could address those in the fifth rule. So that takes us to our usual segment. Julie Chen Moonves is wrong about blank. Now on Thursday, we were only able to cover her Dalton Ross interview from the prior week because Dalton Ross's new interview hadn't come out yet. But now we have the one she did after Britney's eviction and after the finale.
Mhm.
And she gave us, unfortunately, plenty more material in both. For Thursday's eviction, she apparently forgot how Final Three works because when she was listing potential weaknesses for Monty to Dalton, she said that Monty would have to betray either Taylor or Turner, and that person could try to poison the jury against him. But the person in third place doesn't have time to say more than a few words. I mean, Turner basically said hello. There's no way that someone can flip the jury in that time. Turner was the only one to vote for Monty, and he said in interviews that it was because he asked whoever was next to him, like, who are you voting for? And they said, I don't think we're allowed to tell you. So if he had actually been allowed to do that, to talk to them, the vote would have been 9-0. So this idea that third place could flip the jury in any way, given this format, is just stupid. And come on, you're the host of this show. You know how it runs.
I wish she even had a cliff notes in front of her, something that she could look at to, as reading pieces, but she goes in there. Sometimes it feels like blind. And I understand she's been a part of the show for such a long time and she has a place on it. But I do think this season, even last season, it's really showing that her lack of care for how the game is run whatsoever or her input in it. I would just rather she doesn't do those interviews because it just kind of shows that she doesn't care because she doesn't understand how the rules are when clearly she's had every opportunity to learn them.
Well, we need her to do this so we can keep up, going into next season, next summer. We can at least keep this segment going.
I'm pretty sure it adds to 50% of our views at this point.
Yeah.
People just tune in for this part.
Now, she said some other things in that interview that ended up being wrong, too. She said Monty, quote, played the game fairly, had a good social game, and he's well liked by the jury. But those are all things covered by the rules, so we'll deal with them in our usual fashion. Moving to her post-finale interview, she said several more things that were just wrong. First, she said she loved the Taylor one. Okay, that's right. Which, but then she followed it up by saying she made it to the final two without playing the race or gender card. Excuse me? What the hell are you even saying? Those are terms I expect to come out of your generic Facebook commenter, not the host of the show. Even as she was sort of trying to use it as a compliment, it just comes off terrible. Why are you even pulling out those terms?
It's strange. I mean, when she and I again, I don't want to reflect too much on this part of it because there's a lot of complex issues that I think we could talk about a lot of time. But like, if you look at Julie Chen Moonves' career, I mean, how she talks about, how she had to rise up as an Asian American here in the world of media and how it became very difficult. It's so strange that sometimes knowing her story, the way she reacts about these type of things, where saying Taylor didn't use the race or gender card, that's just such a kind of a dog whistle you hear so much, where it's people just kind of saying that to,
oh, they're just playing the race card.
Yeah. I mean, it's what is the race card? That's the thing. That's what we've been discussing this whole season, and people are just like, no, that's not the case here. I mean, there's an adamant version of people, no matter what the race, to be mad at what happened on the season in certain ways. And I mean, the gender card. I mean, the women voted for the women because they wanted to see that happen to, and they liked her as a player. I just think it's confusing what she meant by that. And it's weird.
Yeah, and for the host of a major show to even throw that term out there, it's like, what? Yeah.
I'm surprised to get more like coverage with everything going on.
Yeah. So then she switched into a different kind of wrong when, and this is what you were talking about a little bit, when Dalton asked her who she thought would win if it had been Monty and Turner in the final two. Now, I hope you're not suggesting the same thing that she was, because this should have been an easy one for anyone to answer, based on the finale, but not Julie. She started with, "That's so hard to say. I ran the numbers." I'm sorry, but I don't think it's hard to say, if you watch the show. And the only numbers she ran were the ones added to her bank account for continuing to stand there and reading off of cue cards. But she continued that this would have been a nail biter, and I think he probably would have won by one vote. Okay. Yeah, she's right that Monty would have won, but it would have been a lot more than one vote. The jury literally laughed at the idea of Turner winning. It was on the show.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think at one point Turner was saying it as his own like ability to kind of dissuade them from not taking him.
Right.
Saying he has a horrible jury game. But I think at one point he realized, oh wow, I truly have a horrible jury game.
Yes.
And it's not going to be like, it's not going to work out. Yeah, I just thought it was laughable. I mean, again, like I talked about the potential of Turner, doing that because we didn't know. I remember we discussed that, saying the purview of our thing, we can see how it could work out, but the purview of the jury might be completely different than ours. But it seemed like they were giving the cameras all from all ends because they just did not really value Turner's gameplay, or in general, I think they also gave it credit, but they didn't value that type of game style this season. They didn't really care much about certain competition wins. And something that we talked about and I don't want to get too much into it because we'll talk about the rules, but we talked about a lot was that where Turner's moves, his own moves, are influenced by others. And I think the jury perceives them incredibly influenced by others.
Yeah, I mean, every other person from the press covering it saw and said to Monty when they interviewed him, yeah, if you'd have taken Turner, you'd have won. But Julie's like, I don't know, would have been close. You weren't even paying any attention at all. Yeah. So, so I she just continues to be wrong. She continues to give us fodder here. I don't know. Maybe she's watching and she's like, "Oh, I have to give them stuff for this segment."
It's the final. It's a finale.
Yeah.
She's like, the go out with fireworks, right? So thank you,
Yes.
Julie. I
Yeah.
appreciate the content.
So, is there anything else you wanted to discuss before we get to the rules in the final three?
We have so much to talk about where we're covering three people, so I don't want to spend too much time on anything else in that. But one thing I thought was kind of interesting to note was kind of that the pre-jury segment we saw on the finale, where we had Daniel, Nicole, Pooch, and Amira, and they basically left out Nicole, didn't let her say a single thing there,
which I'm perfectly fine with.
Yep, and then Paloma, she wasn't part of the show.
Who? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that name.
Exactly. And we saw they gave Daniel a very cookie cutter question that I just thought was kind of laughable. If you're going to ask him any question, especially after the edit you gave him and confront him for everything the show did.
Yeah, it was like, really, oh, did the show get boring? Well, it did for a little while. Shut up and go away, Daniel.
That was so strange. I thought probably the most likable segment of that part was Pooch's side, where he was very self-aware and kind of put a few laughs there. What I thought was interesting was Amira really, again, we're not a gossip podcast by any means, but we'll say it as we see it because it happened straight on the episode, where she threw major shade on Monty and Taylor because the jury at that point didn't know or realize there was a true showmance going on there. It just seems such out of left field when you have a whole opportunity to talk about anything else. It seems so strange for her to bring that up.
Yeah, and she has claimed on social media that CBS wanted her to bring it up. And because it would seem shady and entertaining, and because she's under contract, she had to do it. And here's the thing. 2 other people so far that I've seen spoke up on Twitter and said, yeah, we're under the same contract, former players of CBS reality shows. We're under the same contract. They can't force you to say anything. So I don't know if Amira is using that as an excuse, which is what I suspect. I think that they may have approached her about it, and she thought, that would be funny. And then after it happened, she's like, oh, yeah, they made me do it. No, they didn't make you do it. They may have asked you to do it. You agreed. You said it.
Yeah, it's very strange. I mean, if there's one area I can talk about being a pre-jury member and being allowed to speak at finale, you're stuck in a room for like 12 hours beforehand. You send them a few things. Yeah, it wasn't very fun to be around certain people. And then you're given a card essentially to kind of write down what you would think about saying. And before you do this is 2 weeks prior to coming out there to LA to do it all. But you tell them these are your thoughts that you want to talk about. And like I said, I'm going to talk about bullying potentially. And then they say, okay, that could be work and whatnot. They don't tell you what to say specifically. You just want to know what you're going to do. I memorize exactly what I want to say so I could say up there and not like stumble over my words because I would easily do that. Others just kind of winged it. In no shape or form. Again, production changes over the years, but they can't make you say anything. And also, if you do say something there, they can't really cut it because it's live. So at 0 point, I mean, there's a level of personal responsibility, and I don't think you can blame CBS for the things you said on live television.
Yeah. She just had to join in with the rest of the pre-jury crew, and she had avoided most of the pre-jury crew's behavior up till that point, but now
strange. It's like you like read the room, like read the tides. Like you've been out for a while. Why would you what do you think you had to gain to that? This seemed very strange, especially like you said, she relatively seemed kind of like low key since the show, her time on the show didn't seem like we'd have anything like that. And yeah, so anyways, that's everything I have from my end on the pre-jury segment. I'm ready to go into the players.
All right. Well, before we do that, of course, I do want to mention that the Survivor version of the rules that we're about to discuss come in a much shorter and more colorful. I always stumble over this. Colorful. That's a hard word. Form. in poster form. Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster, and click on it. In addition to the poster, there's other ways to get the rules so you can always have them with you, such as the poster on a t-shirt or the checklist on a t-shirt, the checklist on a mug, like the one I drink out of, or sweatshirts. It's getting to be sweatshirt weather. So again, go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed and get everything you want.
Love it. And I have mine ordered and it's on its way. So we'll be sporting the same shirt come next season.
All right. Well, hopefully not at the same time or people won't be able to tell us apart.
That's true. We look very much alike.
Yes, yes. Well, Taylor came into this game and was target number one before they even knew each other's names. Monty was vehemently against her, and Turner also joined in to wanting her gone. But Taylor survived, and she fought and clawed and scratched her way to the end, not by winning comps like they did, but through her smaller strategic play and her social game. One by one, the others fell away while she changed the minds of so many of the other players. How did she do it? How did she take over the narrative of a game that Monte and Turner believed would be based on the number of times they'd won a competition or made a big move? It's time to figure out why Taylor won and Monte and Turner lost. The first and most important rule is, of course, to scheme and plot. And right away, it seems like we're faced with a bit of a challenge when it comes to Taylor, because even Taylor herself criticized her strategy in the game, both at the end and afterwards in interviews. Now, I could certainly agree that Taylor was no super strategic game bot. And in fact, she made a number of strategic mistakes, particularly when she was HOH. The metric against which she was measuring herself in general, though, is not the same as the one I use. She was following along with Monte and Turner, not to mention Terrence and Daniel before them, talking about those big moves and getting this person out or getting that person out. But that's not what true strategy is about. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Good strategy is about the smaller moves, the ongoing moves. You make them throughout the game, and it keeps them going, puts them in a good position. And that's what Taylor did. She made moves as part of the leftovers. She allowed herself to be used as a pawn when she was certain that she wasn't going to suffer the fate of so many other quote unquote pawns. She worked to getting good with others in the house, like, for example, trying to get back with the women by saying she wanted to target Monty. These are just a few examples. Plus, of course, she was the one who primarily convinced Monty and Turner to take out Michael. I don't even think the jury knew about that particular move, though.
No, I mean, I'll start from the beginning like you did, but to that point specifically, she didn't even bring up being the one to influence Monty, and that she didn't really have to. And I guess, you have such limited time to do that pitch, to answer questions in maybe a longer jury format that Survivor has. You might be able to get to that, but otherwise she didn't. What I thought was interesting was we talk about this level of survival she has, right? That each week in and week out, she's on the block. The person next to her gets out. I think she dubbed herself as a blockbuster or something of that nature. Lovely title. But I think there's a level of strategy to that. And I really like that in Big Brother, you can bounce checks, right? You can bounce checks, and eventually, though, that will probably catch up to you. But what we saw with Taylor that week in and week out, the reason why she was able to go forward and forward was because people weren't truly bouncing checks with her. A lot of times, they're paying out the checks and showing, we're going to keep you this week. It creates a bond. You have a mutual bond because now I put my game to save you, to bring somebody else. And even though Taylor then is indebted to them in some shape or form, that connection begins there. And that's why we did see her social bond be so strong, because when you see those bonds be created, they're through fire, right? You don't really call the people you need every day when you don't need them. Taylor needed people at her side day in, day out as the game went on. And through these situations, she was able to create really strong strategical ties. So when she didn't have a position of power, she was able to pay them back and help them out. I think in the eyes of the jury, we saw that being really strong. So that strategical prowess of making sure connections are your forefront is a utilization, is a tool that's many times stronger than competition wins.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I don't want to give the impression that all was sunshine and roses with Taylor's strategy, because it wasn't. When she was HOH the first time, she spoke to the people on the other side of the house before her own allies and made promises before running it by her own people. And she didn't even like extract anything in trade, like, oh, I'll keep you safe if. But then when she came back to her allies and like she was like, oh, I'll put Turner up, and Turner's like, yeah, that's not bussing. And then she's like, oh, how about Turner and Monty? And he's like, yeah, that's discussing. And I'll stop. And he should too. And Julie definitely should. But anyway, the point is they thought she'd lost her marbles at that point, but she recovered from that. She kept moving forward, all the while carefully ensuring she was well placed in the leftovers. She had a final three with Britney and Michael. She moved into a position with Monte and Turner. She had Joseph. People wanted to work with her. Some of it was to use her in, what was certain to be the upcoming leftovers civil war. But the point is, it's smart to make yourself available for that kind of role. As she said, she didn't want to make the biggest moves ever. She was always a team player. She wanted to insulate and defend the leftovers and the women, protecting them as long as she could, because she knew that would also help protect herself.
The way I like to think of it is that when you have in real life, you say you're renting an apartment, you have the threat of eviction, right? When you have that imminent threat, you're not worrying about next week's or next month's rent. But the way Taylor played the game was she became so accustomed to being on the block, she was worried about that eviction, being evicted, but also was thinking about next week. And so we saw that way. And again, like you said, it's not to say there weren't flaws in her game. There really were. And if anything, I think that her less competition levels, numbers helped her game, because we did see when she got in power, she had a bit fun with it, especially when the leftovers were kind of at the top of the top. Mm-hmm. We really did see Taylor kind of playing her best game when she was at a little disadvantage, or potentially one of her allies were more in power, because then she had the ability to scheme around, figure something out. Because what she did really well was she was able to focus on not just the week that happened now, but the week coming forward.
Yeah. And that also kind of goes to a criticism that some people had leveled, which was they said she was carried. But that's a poor description. Alyssa was carried. Sorry, Alyssa, it's true. Taylor purposely put herself into good positions where the bigger threats would worry more about each other and very little about her, which, we'll get to as we go through the rules. As Michael said at the jury roundtable, she got them to do her dirty work, such that what they did might not have even been the best things for them, but they were good for her.
She was the rallying point. I mean, she was the reason that things were turned. And I mean, here's the thing. I mean, the game is such a long game. If we look at from pre-jury only, you could make an argument that Taylor did not have as much autonomy during that time in that game. She had other people she worked with, and they helped her out. But we did see her blossom into jury segment, where now she kind of survived the ring of fire and was able to be molded and kind of now have autonomy in the game, to moving into like actually fully having autonomy in the game as the weeks went by. We saw that growth level there. So the people who say that, oh, she was carried, I think are really just watching and saying that about the first few weeks. But look at so many other winners who were literally had their feet dangling in the fire the first few weeks, whether it was not the best example, but Josh, you had Steve, you had Ian in some stages, you had a lot of people, and there's many more. So you can't base the whole game on those first few weeks.
Right. Now, with all of that said, and moving into Monty, I think it's true that Monty did have a bit more control of the direction of the game, especially once Michael was gone. But having control isn't meaningful unless you do what's right with that control. And Monty believed his biggest move of the game was the move that ended up costing him $675,000. Even before that, earlier in the game, he made other moves that were sometimes questionable. While he mostly avoided the block, he still put himself into difficult positions and was saved by others, such as Michael. as he had his ups and downs with allies through the season. I mean, I think a major reason Monty lost votes was Michael was in the jury to discuss how much Monty was protected.
No, that's a good point. I mean, I think it would be disingenuous for me to say like Monty didn't play a good game. He played a solid game. He played a way. He was strategically smart. And I think if there's any position we're going to say that's probably one of his stronger parts is his first role, where he was strategically scheming and whatnot. But there's a little difference when you were scheming from the top and from the bottom. When you scheme from the top, where you're really not exactly in too many positions of weakness, your purview changes. Your idea of how the game is moved around becomes distorted because it becomes difficult for you to relate to the people who've been on the bottom of the totem pole. He can really never truly understand Michael's position in a lot of ways, even though they were both viewed as competition beasts, Michael more so. But Michael kind of started from the ground below, where he really had to, if he didn't win that veto that first week,
Right.
he's in trouble. And he had to win out because he had to survive, potentially win out a little bit more than he needed to. Versus Monty, when he won, even those times when he points at that 1 week he needed to win power because he put himself in a little bit of difficulty, if I remember correctly, was with the Nicole vote, it probably still would have worked its way out. So strategically, the difficulty level of it, and when we talk about, like, if you're football fans, your SOS, your strength of schedule, right? That record might look great, but who were you going against week in and week out? Versus when you look at Taylor, who was she having to go week in, week out? Her schedule was a bit tougher than what Monty had to go through.
Yeah. Now, one area where Monty was good was in managing to use Michael as a shield.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we discussed how difficult it is to figure out when to take your shield out. But he did pick it right. Of course, you know, Taylor played a role, maybe a major role, in convincing him this was the right week, or else he might have waited a week, and then who knows what would have happened. Again, that butterfly effect you talked about. But he did end up making the right move at the right time. He also made the correct moves for his own game in evicting Britney and Alyssa, taking out two people who would have helped Taylor and Turner, but not him. So he made those moves getting towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, Monty, this wasn't a situation where it was like an incredible, amazing player versus a bad player. These were both really good players. And it's one of those things is that the end score, the 8-1 record, I don't think displays of how potentially closer it was.
Right.
Because I do think there was probably a lot of deliberation within the jury about who should win this. It wasn't a clear cut Taylor should win, but when they figured out Taylor should win, it was, she edged him out there because they played such different games. But the game Monty played was a very solid game, but its height level, the peak level that it could be played, couldn't be compared to the game Taylor was playing, because it's not just always about the competition wins. It's about the whole story, the overarching thing, because that season, that Big Brother season, represents each of the house guests. And I think this is something that house guests moving forward are going to think about a little bit more as they start thinking about how will I be represented and how will this season represent me? And what do I want to have the champion of that? Yeah. And I wonder, we might have to add that in the rules down the line, but because I think that's the part of it.
Yeah, I do think you're right. And I think that was a big problem for Monty because, as I mentioned earlier, he was overly focused on the big moves aspect. He was counting comp wins. He was trying to figure out who would get credit for what. And he lost sight of the actual game of Big Brother and tried breaking it down to numbers. Now, I'm an engineer. So if there's one thing I understand, it's putting everything into a spreadsheet and doing a comparison chart. But that's not Big Brother.
There's a lot of facets to it. I mean,
right.
I was going to put this analogy down the line because I feel I'm throwing too many analogies out. But someone was talking about why aren't competition wins make you a viable winner. I'm not saying they don't, but Big Brother as a whole, the goal is to get to the end. It's creating a house, essentially. You have different tools, and those tools are competition wins, vetoes, different things. That might help you build a house in a different way, but the end result, you have to look at what the prettiest house. You don't care how it was built sometimes. You want to see what looks at the end result. And what we saw was that they just took different tools to fix it. Those tools, though, don't tell the story all the time. The end result does. And what we saw with Taylor and her story through it kind of outbeat Monty. But again, I mean, strategically, I still think Monty played a great game, but he never was in many positions of difficulty where we could see his strategical prowess really shine. He didn't have like a Taco Tuesday. He didn't have the big lie. He didn't have a moment,
Right.
a Dan's funeral. We just saw him kind of play conservatively, even though it was really good for him, but there was nothing to it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people who just want comps, watch the Olympics, watch football, watch, I mean, there's a reason. So, Mark Burnett had another show before Survivor, and I'm suddenly blanking on the name of it, but it was Extreme Racing, where they had to, I mean, like really extreme. And they even aired another season of it recently on Prime or Netflix. I don't remember which. There's a reason that show isn't on CBS, but a version that has competitions and challenges, but a lot more social strategic aspect of it is, it turned into Survivor in terms of that's what people are playing. It's not just who can overcome the biggest physical obstacles, who can make it to the top of the mountain, who can swim through this ice cold water, who can, figure out what comic it is that, that's the right one on the board. Those are tools, but that's not the game.
Exactly. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
was just going to say, no matter, even though CBS clearly wants it to, that's what they like putting on the show.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like if there's any game that we should value social aspects in social game a little bit more, it should be Big Brother, because we get to watch them live a social life. We
Right.
see the feeds. We have 24/7 essentially around the clock around them, and these competition parts of it only probably build up to what of the real game, 10% of it.
Yeah, if that.
If that. So it's strange that, again, I think we have to look at these as a tool
Right.
that moves you forward versus like the final verdict. You've won the game because of it. And I also think that argument, the strategic argument that competition wins, falls a little short when you have a comp piece like Michael in the jury, because I think then it becomes devalued, because it wasn't like you were the comp beast. It wasn't like this. It was, I was the comp beast, and yes, you were able to win one veto over me, and it ended up happening.
Mm-hmm.
But me winning these things doesn't mean I should be there more than you. I feel like
right.
if Michael wasn't there, maybe it's a more compelling thing. But we have the best comp person here in jury. You're not the best comp person
right
there. So
yeah. All right, so moving to Turner, we, continue that situation where just looking at the spreadsheet might make it seem like he played an amazing game. The leftovers formed and flipped the game on his HOH. Kyle was evicted on his HOH. He put up Michael to be evicted in the double on his HOH. He survived Direfest and came back into the house after being aligned with literally everyone. He had a final two with Kyle, a final two with Monty. He was super close to Alyssa, and so on. But when we really look at those situations, not just the notches on the spreadsheet, we see that he was more a passenger or a spectator much of the time, letting someone else do all the steering. For the leftovers, Joseph and Kyle and others basically forced him into it. Sure, he gave the speech about bullying, but the action only came after some pressure. He wanted to keep Kyle after the revelations of moving to the next one. He wanted to keep Kyle and had to be convinced to get rid of him. He had to be convinced by Monty to evict Michael after Monty won veto. I still remember that conversation. It was shown right there on TV. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to do it. Monty had to convince him. It seemed like everything he did was based on what the others wanted, to the point of saying he was voting with the House to evict Alyssa when there was only one other vote. Like I said at the time, he was the House. The funniest thing is he spent the whole game saying, I want to vote with the House, only to end up the lone vote against the House at the end.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true irony right there. Turner's game is interesting because I've been high on Turner's game throughout the season, and I would have been interested to see how he pitched himself in the final jury. But it felt like I think Turner was just having so much fun playing the game that he wasn't realizing that when he makes certain moves, the kind of social consequences we had to it. I think Monty's a mixture of Taylor and Turner's game, I will say, in the middle-ish. Turner and Taylor are complete opposites in a certain way, because his social game was a game to kind of make people upset, whether it was his own ondoings from, which we'll get into, like from his the hygiene, the joke of the season, where it bothered some people, was kind of a running joke, or was to like his issues with indie, different things, which made great TV. Which I do think, if somebody's going to be asked back, Turner is probably one of the top people of the season for it, because he makes great TV. But I do think, like you said, he was a passenger in his own decisions. And if he followed that up later on saying, like, I wanted to share the blood, and that was my reasoning for it, it was a strategical reason to be like, I don't know what to do, even though actually I did know what to do. I would have loved that. We didn't really get a chance to see that. And what it seems from interviews, he was just kind of going along with things. And that was the issue.
I mean, to further emphasize this, Michael pointed out at the jury roundtable that Turner didn't make the moves he was being credited with. He even said Turner would literally fall asleep in strategy discussions. And Turner himself told Mike Bloom, there were a lot of times where I feel like I fell into situations. That's why I feel like I just stumbled throughout the season and did good. Like when the leftovers are forming, I felt like I was watching a movie. I feel like I fell into a lot of good situations and a lot of bad situations. I mean, I appreciate the honesty that it took to admit that, but it doesn't speak well to his strategic abilities.
I mean, there's a level of honesty and awareness I love about that it is, because that's what this game is about. It's a lot of times being in the right place at the right time, right room when somebody's talking or somebody's upset. And again, I always say that opportunities are when preparation meets luck. So, Turner was kind of ready to take those things up, but we did see that he was just kind of going through the lulls of it. And I think it's kind of, he embodies the perfect, when you do a group project and you have that really charismatic person there who's just there to like talk in front of the crowd sometimes, and they get an A+ there, right? The teacher's like, oh, great work, because somebody else did a lot of the work and that person was in the room. But instead of the teacher grading this final assignment, it was his own peers grading it, so they already knew what he was doing. So
right.
Again, I still think he was a very mixture of luck, prowess, game ability, a good player. But what I want to stress is that this final three, I think we haven't seen as strong of a final three as we've in this season as we've seen in past seasons before for quite a bit. So I think if we plot some of these people in some other seasons against them, they're probably beating them out.
Yeah. And when we got to the final five, we had discussed this already in a previous podcast, but this was part of Turner's problem there. In when he got to the final three, was he screwed up so badly by voting out Alyssa instead of Taylor. If he had kept her, he could have had a situation where he was very likely going to final two almost no matter what. Basically the Taylor that Monty put himself into. But he blew it out of misplaced loyalty to Monty and a misread of the situation. Once again, he wanted to follow what someone else said to do, even to the detriment of his own game.
I think that's what it came up to. It was that part specifically that was fine if he was letting his other decisions influence him, because they were good for his game, right? So these decisions that were influenced by others helped his game. But in this moment where he needed to make that decision himself and not let anybody influence his decision, his read on it actually was the best read for it. He let him be persuaded by both Taylor and Monty to kind of vote out essentially his top ally.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, I think we can move to the second rule here, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Starting again with Taylor, I don't think she really had much in the way of issues here. We already discussed how she mishandled her first HOH, and part of that fell here, but she recovered from it. Beyond that, she managed to balance out the different alliances we mentioned, such as keeping herself between Michael and Britney and the Monte and Turner duo. Did you see any issues here for her?
No, not exactly. I also do think she didn't really have many situations she could be in where she was spilling as much of this, because in the beginning of the game, she was one of the last people to find out information. And then when she was in her core group with her and Joseph, Michael, Brittany, all the cards were on the table. So she wasn't scheming too much. She was scheming with others. I mean, I think the only time, like we talked about, was that week when she came in power with HOH. And I do think when her and Joseph would run off a little bit, sometimes they put too big of a target on them. So there were certain plays from the fake showmans with Joseph I'd probably point at to wanting to put him on the block. And then also a level of sometimes getting a little more confident in situations when she was stuck with Nicole, right? Being bridged together, trusting the plan that it would work out. Because then that's where she left a lot of trust to other people to do some of the work for her. But it worked out in the end because she had those social bonds with them. So yeah, I think though when she came in power, and especially when her and Joseph were together, a little too much scheming went on. Actually, I think if we look at the hindsight 2020, Joseph leaving might have been actually very good for her game because it made so that she had to play a very strict line of how to get there and didn't have as many options to play around with.
Yes, and now that fake showmance may not be fake anymore.
Who knows?
So, moving to Monty, he had a few problems here earlier in the game when he was talking strategy a bit too much, and he also recovered. But later in the game, Monty lied pretty freely while pretending he didn't. For example, he said, "Oh, I trust actions, not words," and took the action of voting out Michael after promising with his words to keep him. He scolded Britney for a long time because she dared question him about the possibility that he had a deal with Turner, which he 100% had and denied over and over again. He was part of the Pound and made a deal with Turner and Michael while denying ever working with the guys, and so on. Obviously, a fair amount of lying is expected in Big Brother. But the main problem was Monty kept insisting he was playing a clean game. I mean, he said it so often that he even got Julie to repeat it. All right, getting Julie to repeat it isn't much of an accomplishment, I guess. But the fact is he didn't play a clean game. And I think the jury saw that and knew what he was claiming and was like, nah.
Yeah, I mean, here's the other thing too, is that he was truly centralized, and that's the power to him. He was centralized in power of connections with almost everyone on the cast as mid-game came on board. The only person that truly had a dagger against him, who was very vehemently going to go against him, was Daniel, and he really made quick work of Daniel. So even then, even when he was backstabbing or potentially over plotting, no one really thought he was plotting against them. They just thought Monty's part of the group. They knew he was a threat. The only other person I think might have been Kyle / Alyssa, where they started viewing it as him as part of that. But in general, even if you overplot, if you have a lot of friends and they don't share your secrets, you're in the good. And I think that was kind of a situation of Monty when even he did overplot, he had some friends on the people he did it, so they weren't sharing his stuff. So he became lucky for that.
Yeah. I would say Turner was fairly similar to Monty and that he told lies and then acted like he hadn't. A different thing he did was when he did lie, it was game, so it was okay. When Britney did it, it was slimy, and he ranted on and on about what a snake and a terrible person she was. So again, to me, it was the hypocrisy of the whole situation.
Yeah, no, I think two moments kind of come in my head. Okay, one moment is kind of within the game, but not strategically in the game. I think the scheming around, unfortunately, with Jasmine just wasn't smart. I know it's good TV and everything, and I loved watching it. But we definitely saw she was very soured against him, and I'm not saying that would have saved the jury vote anyways, but it might have helped in those conversations. And then two, the thing that's most apparent is him and Alyssa. The way he really, I mean, we strictly say don't backstab anybody if you don't need to. And that was rule number 2. And he did not need to do this. There's many ways he could have gone about this. He could have, hopefully, first of all, should have tried keeping her, not backstab her. If he was going to do that, he shouldn't have done it secretly. He needed to lay it out to Alyssa and tell her this is the reason why, for whatever BS reason it might have been, lay it out to her so that when she goes to jury, she can convey why she thinks Turner's a good player.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we could go to the third rule, which talks about the need to be flexible. And I think if there's one thing we could say about Taylor's game, it's that she did what was necessary, according to this rule. Many people, myself included, I have to say, would never have been willing to work with some of the people who had come after her early. But she did what she could to help Indy and Jasmine, even after what they'd put her through. I mean, she worked closely and did other things closely with Monty, even after the things that he said to her. And I'm not just talking about the stuff at the beginning, for which he at least sort of apologized, but the BS at the end of the game, which we've talked about, in previous podcasts, and we're going to get to in a couple rules here. Listening to him spew his nonsense couldn't have been easy, but she just let it roll off her back because she needed to.
She was flexible in a lot of ways. And I'll put it to game wise that she was very able to move around different scenarios from whether it was the coalition of when she realized she wasn't truly in the girls, she had to be put against with Michael and Britney, got with them, made a coalition within leftovers. I mean, we did see her float in different ways, and wasn't for a lack of trying she wasn't able to work with Terrence. She did offer the olive branch a lot. So in all beings, I mean, I don't think there's an issue where we could push that she was unflexible in any of her decisions. If anything, she might have been a little bit too flexible in certain decisions when we saw her come in power with the whole situation of potentially putting herself or putting Joseph on the block. I think we did see, and I think criticisms that weren't potentially valid where people were able to kind of influence her one way or the other within those weeks of power. But other than that, I mean, I think we see down the line where she knows what she exactly needs to do, even though she's working with Michael and Britney, she needs to cut Michael. And she's one of the biggest proponents that cut Michael behind the scenes.
Yeah. And that was exactly it. She was willing to take on different roles. Like even they talked about the number of times she was on the block. Well, part of that was to keep the leftovers secret. They wanted to pretend to continue targeting her, and she allowed it. Many people would have refused, but she saw that bigger picture. Now, there were other times when she stood up for herself and said, okay, enough. I've been up there enough. Let someone else take their turn. But that was good too, but she was flexible when she needed to be in that way.
Very much so. She found a way to make it work. And I don't really think we can knock her too much on this rule number 3.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the other ones?
Well, Monty, on the other hand, I would not at all describe him as flexible, either in his gameplay or his personality. Early on, once he got it in his head that Taylor was terrible, he wanted her gone. And he just kept insisting on it, even when everybody else had moved on. Everybody else had said, okay, we're going to vote Pooch. We're done. And he refused to budge. He kept lobbying everyone he could find. And, he refused to even talk to Taylor to try to mend fences. Now, eventually, obviously, they did talk. They mended fences. He didn't, vote. He came over for that vote. And, but that kind of continued on and off through the season. When Britney gave Mike Bloom her quick thoughts on the remaining house guests, which was literally months after the one I was just talking about, she said Monty was, quote, set in his ways. And I think she might have been talking about more than just the game, because we saw the same in his behavior towards Taylor. We've talked about it previously. Again, like I said, we'll talk about it in the 5th rule, but he just could not get over himself and seemed to believe that not only was he always right about everything, but that everybody should thank him for being right and telling them that they were wrong.
He was an immovable object. Yeah. I mean, that was really what it came to in the game. I mean, any force that went to him, he was able to kind of stay there. And I think it was his, it's a testament that a player can be that immovable and lack of flexibility and still get so far in the game. And I think that's how he played the game very strategically. And what he did, though, he really never let it be anyone else's decision for any play. He never played into anybody's own game, essentially. We see when Daniel's trying to call him out in I forget which week, was it week 5? And Daniel's trying to call him out in front of every single person. Monty kind of masterfully said, like, no, this is like, why would I believe anything you're saying? You're going to just try turning it on, even though he was really in a tight position. So Monty, this is strange, and I don't know how to say this, but almost his, if he was more flexible, I don't know if he would have made it as far as he did. I think he was so adamant in his ways. I think people respected that in a shape, in a certain way. And against somebody else, like what we say, if it's Monty versus Turner, I think they would have been like, yes, I like how Monty stuck to his ways or was perceived to that. So, but compared to Taylor, it seemed like he wasn't adaptable.
Right. Now, I will say there were a couple times that he showed some strategic flexibility or attempted to. After the house split, when they were brought back together, Monty saw that the wind might be changing direction and quickly jumped over to the Turner and Kyle side to suggest backdooring Michael. But then he was also playing the Taylor, Britney, Michael side, and he seemed just fine jumping back and forth. The problem was, and maybe this goes to what you were saying, little did he know that had the Kyle revelation not happened, he was going to be the target. So he was trying to avoid being the target by being flexible, but it probably would have been him.
Yeah, it's funny how things work out.
Yeah.
Again, right person, right time.
Yeah.
And I guess now it comes down to Turner and what your thoughts are on his flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, since we mentioned that he almost always took the go with the flow route, he was the ultimate in flexibility. He was always doing what other people wanted him to do, as we said. That's not really the kind of flexibility we're looking for in this rule, because it comes without any agency behind it. When we talked about Taylor, she did things for a reason. He wasn't so much flexible as he was aimless.
Ooh, that's a strong word there, David. Aimless. I will say, I think there was just probably a little bit more too much flexibility in some of his moves. But he was, for example, the week when basically his HOH and the leftovers come out, he really kind of adapted to it. He figured out a way to play in there. When he was out in the yard, when they were doing a Dire Fest, he saw the way it was working one way or the other. And again, he could have stayed strong with Joseph, and we discussed in a previous podcast that it might have been better if he stayed quiet. He was really quickly able to adapt into being that 4 and make sure he himself wasn't a target. He talked to Terrence so that way he wouldn't be on the block there. So I think we did see levels of his own agency and flexibility when the gameplay happened. But I think that sometimes when the wind did blow too tough on a decision that he probably shouldn't have made, he also bent to their will. So a bit of both. But I don't want to say all his actions were aimless, because I feel like there was some concerted effort.
Okay, not all his actions. Okay, well, we could go to the 4th rule, which says players should not let their emotions control them. And I'm going to reverse the order here and start with Turner, because he was the main one lecturing over and over again about how the game need to be separated from the personal, which is absolutely true. Okay, so I called him aimless, but now I'm saying, yes, he was right about this rule. So it all balances out. But did he always do that? No. But in theory, it's true. As with him in the 2nd rule, when it was used against him, he got upset about it, the poor guy. The funny thing is that the one time he should have listened to his heart more was when it was telling him to keep Alyssa. And that was only because it would have been the best move for his brain to make too, as we discussed.
Exactly. I mean, that would have been the move that he needed to make. And I think one thing we saw, it was a detriment to how the jury viewed him because of how emotional he got with Britney, for example. I don't think he was going to win a vote and there was no situation she was going to vote for him over any of the others. And also I want to bring him back to Dire Fest, because I think when I don't want to say emotion, but he did jump on the bandwagon against Joseph when he was kind of Joseph's closest ally at that time within Dire Fest. Emotionally, he seemed kind of charged in the conversation, and that definitely probably played an impact of Joseph being much more removed towards Turner and more closer to. That was his last remark essentially put on him. So there were moments I think where his emotional gameplay with Indy, other people, I would say came most play within the house guests leaving. And that's the issue, is like he left the house guests who were on the jury a lasting feeling of, oh, Turner will turn on me emotionally.
Yeah. So, all right, moving as we continue in reverse order, what did you think about Monty in this rule?
I think a lot of people I've seen describe Monty as very cool, collected, and calm. But I will say, and I think it was noted by the jury that he started to come in the last final five, final six, those weeks as they went in, a level of hubris where I feel like that's where his emotion came out. I don't think it came out in other words. I mean, yes, he kind of berated, he didn't kind of, he berated Britney and others on certain things he shouldn't do. If that's, we could say that's a place of emotion or more of like a play nice section.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that I think the motion of hubris, the cockiness, definitely came out, and people started to feel like Monty thought himself he was going to win this. He deserves this himself. He felt like, and the
Yeah.
issue is this: like, it's one of those things. Like the worst person made a good point. If you ever seen those memes, but
Yeah.
you don't like them, so it doesn't matter the good point they make. You're not going to listen to it. And I think that's what happens when you become cocky or hubris.
Right.
People don't want to listen to it.
Yeah. I would say he did a good job in his own mind at this rule. He felt he could have a showmance with Taylor and still play the same, break up with her and still play the same, get back with her and still play the same, break up with her again. And, tell her her personality was terrible, still play the same. But in doing all this, he really did risk his game. First, he thought he was keeping the showmance a secret, but at least each of Alyssa and Turner figured it out. That could have caused a schism with Turner if Turner had actually been thinking for himself. Then the way he behaved towards Taylor could also have caused problems if she weren't so incredibly forgiving and also focused herself on the end game. So basically, despite his own mistakes, he got away with them because of the other people around him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could have been a big butterfly effect and went in one universe, a parallel universe where it didn't really impact as much. But it's not to say that Monty played a completely calm and collected game. He did have emotional moments.
Yeah. Now, for Taylor, one main thing stands out to me. Despite her friendship with Michael and their final 3 deal, she successfully pushed Monte and Turner to get him on the block so she could help evict him. And she said when voting, in this game, friendship comes after 750,000. I vote to evict Michael.
I mean, you can't argue with that. I mean, that was really to the point of it. She put her emotions to the side. I will say, if we're going to criticize Monty for it, we kind of have to criticize Taylor, even though in hindsight it seemed like it worked out. But at the time, getting emotionally involved with Monty so close to that, where she was truly kind of in a fiery seat, where Turner should have picked up that, hey, maybe she's the best bet to get out here. I mean, it really comes down to Turner in that situation that he had the agency and he decided not to take the agency. And both Monty and Taylor did everything they could do to give him ammo to take him out.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the parts we saw her work emotionally. But I mean, throughout the whole season, I don't think we saw much. I mean, I think we testament when we saw Daniel berate her and go completely off on her. We've discussed that plenty on this podcast. She really handled herself in probably the most mature way you could. I mean, again, of course, you're going to have feelings about it, cry about it, whatever it may be. She did that separately, but she didn't go and try to fight Daniel. She didn't try to go say this and that to him. She was like, okay, like, so yeah.
I was just thinking of what Indy said. He'd have had to been running if that were me. I mean, she's obviously not immune to emotion, but she had been forced to put up a wall against those people, the Daniels of the house, or she would have gone crazy from everything that was thrown at her.
Exactly. And I'm going to add one thing. She didn't let the emotions control her. She controlled the emotions because she utilized those emotions in a really good way to actually kind of jumpstart the leftovers.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, the 5th rule tells players they need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. As I was just saying, Taylor had to put up a wall to protect herself. But it was kind of a one-way wall. She had to keep the outside BS out while also allowing her own humanity to show through. She told the jury she was painted as the most unreasonable, unthinkable villain. And she had to make sure people knew she was not manipulating. She was herself. All of that started, of course, because at the beginning of the game, literally the opening hours, people were not open to talking with her because of their prejudices. Once Taylor was nominated, she tried to use her social game to figure out what was going on, swing people to her side. And we saw she wasn't successful But that was mostly due to the same reasons and the obstinance of certain people, including Monty. Once that first week was over, she at least had a bit of breathing room. But that crew was still trash talking her. It was obviously affecting her, but she didn't show most of them that it was. At one point she said on the live feeds, I know the rest of the world wants me to respond with rage, but if I do, it will take all my energy and I won't be able to play this game. So I choose love. And that pretty much describes how she dealt with everything for the rest of the game.
Yeah, no, it was incredibly impressive. I think similar to how we talked about Joseph, when we're like, he doesn't really need to play nice or pretend to be nice because he seems like a very genuinely nice person, and so he's just letting himself be that way. I think we saw the same way with Taylor. I mean, not to keep throwing it back, but in the sense of when we think about the whole situation with Nicole, where Nicole is in the room crying because she's so frustrated that Taylor's ruining her game. Taylor's in another room basically praying for her and trying to hope that everything's okay with her mom. When accused with so many different things, she only kind of continued to show the each of the cheeks. Sorry, I was trying to do a good example. I don't think it came across, but she moved she slapped her here. She just moved the cheek there.
Turn her other cheek. Yeah,
exactly. Thank you for the right face. So I think we saw that throughout the whole game. And I think at the very end, that's what the jury just liked her much more, not just game aside. Like, I'm not saying her game was bad by any means. She had a strategical game, but that aside, they just liked her. They thought she was a genuine human being. And we saw Joseph fight tooth and nail for her in that jury house.
Yeah. I mean, Taylor told Mike Bloom, I just didn't think that a journey was going to be anything worth overcoming or pitching to a jury. Big Brother fans and players really like to stick to what they believe is the trueness of the game. And then she also said, when it comes to my experience in the house, when it comes to the relationships that I had to take a very long time to form, I didn't even see it as a social strategy. I saw it as personal. I just want people to understand I'm a human being. I remember even having a conversation with Britney talking about how I felt I had to join the Breakfast Burrito Club with Monte and Turner in exchange for Turner to keep me in the house. I remember Britney saying, it's a really good social move. And I just felt like that's not a social move. That's just I had to do something to stay in the house. And the thing is, that's exactly it. Doing something to stay in the house in that regard pertains to her social game. Taylor took those initial prejudices that were aimed at her and she worked on them until either the person behind them was gone or she changed their mind, or in some cases, both.
That's very true. I mean, I think it's very easy to say in this game, like, be nice to somebody, that you don't know when it's like a clean slate. But she was never given a clean slate. She was playing at a disadvantage for a very long time because people just harbored certain biases against her. Even that, she tried to continue to be kind with them because, one, for her own game, just as a person, and just wanted to be a good representation. As she mentions in many of her interviews, she continued to play nice and be kind to others. But that's really difficult to do when they're not being nice to you whatsoever. So we saw that through and through. I feel like that covers Taylor pretty well. Unless you had anything else you want to add there. Otherwise,
yeah, the only other thing is, we heard Michael suggest at the jury roundtable that it would be a good move. Now, they didn't know yet, if Taylor could get Monty to bring her along to the final two. Now, Taylor has said she didn't really think of that as a move, and it was more just an agreement that developed over time. But again, just as, I was saying about her other social moves, she did things that helped her in the game. It wasn't moving chess pieces around, but it was making those social connections that allowed those things to happen.
And the last thing I'll say on that, I think it's kind of those when you have these, I'm trying to think of the right word for them, but I'm blanking on it, but the undeniables, like the things that aren't written on paper, essentially, your indescribables, essentially, that not her numbers, but certain things that each of the jury members feel about her. And those are the powerful items because that's not on paper. Both Turner and Monty didn't see those because she had those individual relationships with each of those jury members. And so they counted certain things regardless over the competition wins, over the big moves, over different things. So we saw those personal connections, and being nice is how you get those. Like we said, it's another tool to get to the end.
Yeah. All right. I'd like to skip Monty for the moment and go to Turner because I'm going to have a lot to say about Monty. But what did you think of how Turner did here?
So Turner, so the idea is you have to pretend to be nice and play the social game. You also have to act like adult, and don't be lazy and keep your bad habits. This rule covers a lot. All right. Turner, by all means, I think was probably one of the. If we're going to talk about like as a general, much
Mm-hmm.
kinder, house guest than some others. I mean, he is the
Peace and love,
one.
man. Peace and love.
Peace and love. He's the one who stood up for, regardless of what you say, if there's production interference, what this, he was the one who stood up for Taylor, was like, hey, we need to stop this bullying. He gave the whole speech, big turnaround in the season. He was a part of that. So there's a level of good, genuine kindness, I think, and niceness that comes from Turner. So I don't want to talk too much about that because there's little things I can nitpick. The biggest thing I think we could talk about is playing the social game as well as keeping your bad habits to yourself. I think he let those things mingle a little bit too much. It seemed like in the jury's eyes, from his communication, his jokes, his pranks with Jasmine, that seemed very one way. It wasn't kind of like a brother-sister relationship where they both do it to each other. He was doing it to her and she was just being annoying, so he felt justified in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think his hygiene and other things were unfortunately noted in there. Again, I don't know how much the show just definitely like lasered on, and it could just be an exaggeration, but what we were shown, it seemed like it was kind of off-putting to other house guests. So yeah, I think he got like a C, maybe a C
Yeah.
plus.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, he seemed to be a nice enough guy, but he just wasn't so great at some of the things you discussed, and also the pretending part. If he didn't like you, it showed. Just ask Jasmine. Ask Indy. He admitted he had barely spoken to her all game before she was evicted. Um, there were really several times when Turner just didn't want to talk to people. And as we mentioned, Big Brother is a strategic and social game. Obviously it wasn't the cause of the end of his game, but it would have contributed to his loss if he had made it to final two.
Yeah, no, I very well put. I think
Yeah.
it didn't play with his loss, but his final two. Now, for the person you want to talk a lot about, let's hear it.
I'd
Monty.
rather not talk about him, but he's forcing me to. In general, it does seem like Monty often did a decent enough job of pretending to be nice. Earlier in the game, he told, or Daniel told Jasmine that Monty's social game was amazing. Jasmine wasn't so sure about that. But, Daniel said that Monty made you feel like he was listening, even if he wasn't. And apparently that worked. But from the outside, like as we're watching, you could just see his constant head nodding. And it looked ridiculous. Someone would be talking and he would just be doing this the whole time. And it looked so fake that I made a TikTok that was nothing but him nodding his head because, I'm getting dizzy. I don't know how he can do that for that long. But people actually seemed to believe he was listening. So good for him, I guess.
I think you might be, and there might be some other parts you want to bring up, so that I'll
Yes.
hold my talk for all that. But I will say, I think by all his part, I don't think Monty was horrid in this
Right.
aspect of it. I mean, here's the thing: is that when you pretend to be nice, play the social game, people still have to. If you're not going to do that, say if you did the opposite of that, people still have to perceive it like that. So even when he was kind of being pretty difficult, pretty rude, I don't think anyone ever viewed at him. They viewed it as him just being not playing not nice, but serious about a moment. Like this
Right.
is the only time I think somebody took true offense to it, which they should have. I'm not saying they were unjustified taking it. It was Britney when she was like, "Wow, you're really coming." Like she held it against, but otherwise, everybody other
Mm-hmm.
never had anything bad. It seems to say about his social game or his pretended kindness that I can think of. And it's not the reason why he lost. It's just
Right.
because he was worse at it than Taylor, who's like
Yeah.
stat level in that area was like 110.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of Taylor, let's talk specifically about his
Mm-hmm.
behavior towards her. We've discussed some of it previously. We know it took him a while to apologize to her for the things he'd said about her early in the game. He did it again. He did apologize to her like in mid-August, even saying people had misjudged her in discussions with others. Like he told Alyssa that. And yet there he was in the last couple weeks of Big Brother, blaming her for the way those very people had acted. So he's already said to other people, oh, she was misjudged. Now he's turning around and blaming her again. He said she had a condescending tone. He complained about her making offhand joking comments. When she asked for examples of when she'd rubbed people the wrong way, he couldn't give those, but he knew it had happened. As I said before, he was mansplaining her own personality to her. And then in the final days, we got even more of an insight into Monty as we saw him on the live feeds telling Turner he has friends at home who were similar to Taylor in that no matter how many times he told them what they could work on or how they affect others, they just wouldn't listen. It was like they had a block in receiving this highly valuable information from the high and mighty Monty for some reason. And, he said Taylor was the same, ignoring what he was telling her when he was just trying to be helpful and explaining maybe that's why people didn't connect with her. And, when she asked why Amira and Nicole didn't get treated the same way she was, he said it was because they didn't give off the same impression. I cannot imagine the amount of willpower it took for Taylor not to just slug the man at that point. I truly don't know where he gets off thinking he's the arbiter of how other people should behave, but based on what he said to Turner, it's amazing he has any friends at all. I mean, maybe now that I think about it, he has guy friends and, the people who always have problems are women. I'm not sure. It would fit into what we've seen of his personality, but I can't say for sure. So I won't, jump to that conclusion.
Wow. Tell us how you really feel, David. I did not know
Well,
you.
do we have another hour?
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I here's the thing is I think that all your points are valid in a lot of ways with Monty. I do think here's the thing. I think with this rule, we talk about it as a holistic thing in the sense pretend to be nice, play a social game with every single person. And again, Taylor's part of that group. I do think at that point, though, it doesn't really impact his, I'm thinking on the game level, impact his game on the end game because he's being kind of mean to her throughout the game, but specifically at the end where we saw the rude behavior come out a lot more. At that point, she doesn't really have much of a choice, which is, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but his game is not being impacted from his bad behavior. It could have potentially in a vote, but I still think she would have voted for him. But yeah, no, it wasn't a good look for him by any means. We have had a lot of people on this podcast unfortunately break Rule 6 of ours.
Yeah,
not our Rule 5, but and 6 to come.
Yeah. All right. Well, the sixth rule, since you mentioned it, warns against being too much of a threat. We discussed in the first rule several times that a big part of Taylor's strategy was to avoid being seen as a threat. And in fact, to let the bigger threats duke it out while she stayed out of the way. She did this well, in fact, so well that she thought she had accidentally created a situation where she couldn't win. Luckily for her, Monty thought the same thing.
I will say, because this is a rule I was waiting for, I think all three of these players actually did a phenomenal job of managing the threat level in different ways. It's just that Taylor did it much better because she did to a level where they all thought she wasn't a threat. I mean, this is the one rule that made her win the game. I will say that. I feel adamant saying that because if there's any rule she could have broke, she couldn't break this rule because without this rule, if they perceive that she truly would win the game, she would have been removed much quicker. And Monty wouldn't have taken her. Any of the other rules, debatably, she still could have won without them. This rule alone, I feel like, would have sunk her. Moving on. Oh, I guess we'll talk about finish up with Taylor and I'll talk about
I mean, she surrounded herself with shields. We discussed she had the final 3 deal that involved Michael. She had another with Monty. Earlier, she had Joseph. Yes, she was nominated 6 times, but there was always someone else to take out. And she knew that would continue. Why take aim at Taylor if Michael is available? It's just one example. And then she just moved on each time.
I think it's an interesting strategy too that we can talk about and later on delve into. But the idea is that you don't need to be the least threatening person to survive the game. You just need to make sure that the person next to you is a little bit more threatening.
Exactly.
Even if you're at like an 85% threat level, you just need the person next to you to be at a 90%. And she was really good at working her allies and other people into thinking the person next to her, regardless if they were or not, were truly the biggest threat of the game at that point.
Yeah, and that leads really well into Monty because, despite him being a personal trainer, a pretty good physical specimen, even if he was no Joseph, he managed to avoid being seen as too much of a threat himself because it was people were so worried about Michael or Michael was protecting him. Um, it even got to the point where Britney said to the cameras, I think it was like a bit over a week ago, I don't think Monty has even played that impressive a game. He was protected by Michael for way too long. So Monty stayed out of, being a target by staying in Michael's shadow.
Yeah, I mean, he used Michael definitely for partially of it. I think he was able to really be in conversations and a lot of central conversations where people couldn't really bring up his threat level unless it was on the peripheral things. They weren't in rooms saying, "Oh, Monty's a huge threat," or if they were, it didn't last very long. They always felt there was they'll get him down the line. Monty also, I think, what was really impressive, had the awareness to know that he had a level of threat one coming in, had an existing level of threat, and never, regardless of his hubris, he never stopped thinking he could potentially be backdoored by anybody in the house. And so that's why I think it was really impressive in that level of, there's a level of jury management and there's a threat management where he managed his threat, but also managed his opponent's threats. And Michael, like you mentioned, that he knew how long he needed to keep him and when to cut him, when he realized, okay,
Yes.
at this point, I can cut him. And I also realized that Turner is a big threat next to me too. And now I can use him as a shield. I don't need two shields. I need to just let go of him so I can run a little lighter. And I think that was really impressive.
Yeah, and Monty should have theoretically looked like someone who was too big of a threat to go to the end with, but he solved that by making a couple alliances who would both take him to final two, and then of course winning more comps. So he had both situations there to get out of the threat situation.
And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
off.
No,
go ahead.
One last thing with him is that I thought it was impressive that he made sure, we see people talk about this, but I haven't seen this strategy used as much. Made sure to take out people he might have perceived as potential floaters or people he knew that people wanted to bring alongside with them because they wouldn't be him. So he made sure to take out Britney, make sure to take out Lisa because he knew the other folks thought they had a better chance to beat them in the game. He wanted to leave them with no choice by himself, and I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as for Turner, he was similar to Monty in terms of comp wins and even held the lead on him for a while, which made him appear to be a threat. And plus, we discussed earlier how big things had happened during his HOHs, which they also thought made him a threat. I mean, he even told Julie that he believed having, quote, too many moves was what got him evicted. And I do suppose he's right, because despite what the jury and the viewing audience thought, and us not being impressed, Monty was indeed worried about facing him at the end, so worried he didn't bring him along. So yes, he was too big of a threat in Monty's eyes, and Monty's eyes were what mattered.
Yeah, I mean, it became another situation where also, I will bring it back to Taylor here. She was able to make sure that Turner seemed like the bigger threat than her. It didn't matter how big either of them were. He was just a bigger threat than her. And I thought it was interesting that the perception of what we found with the jury, as well as the viewers, a lot of people didn't look at Turner as much of a threat down the line versus the houses in the house thought Turner was actually a very big threat. But I think that he did manage. It's impressive to be able to have those 3 HOHs, and regardless of how he was influenced or not, but take out pivotal people and still not be turned around and targeted. That he made it to the final 3, all that part with having a resume like he did. Again, I think if we go back, we usually don't see a final 2 or a third place person having that level of resume.
Yeah. All right, we could go to the 7th rule, which says to trust almost nobody. As the numbers dwindled, Taylor put her trust in Britney, and that almost caused problems for her. But luckily for her, Turner's trust in Monty was absolutely 100% solid, and he would never do anything to harm that relationship. Mind you, that trust wasn't so lucky for Turner because by following it, he eliminated any chance he had of winning.
Yeah, I mean, I think Taylor and Turner both didn't do very well in this situation. I'll specifically talk about Taylor right now. Is that throughout the game, I think we did see her being a little too trusting in certain situations. Sometimes, again, she had to depend on it. She needed to. She had no choice but to trust them. But we didn't really see as time moved on that she was lucky that her own teammates and our alliance members really didn't want to manipulate her really to an extent, because I feel like she would have trusted them to a level of where she would have done that. We did see at the end she really was putting a lot of faith also in Monty's hands as it go with the showmatch, other portions of it, and also giving him the ability to, when she didn't want Britney to go home, she accepted that maybe Monty would be able to make the decision that she believes best. She told Britney, "Don't worry, Monty's in my pocket. I can use this." It didn't really work out for her.
No, it didn't. Now, I do think Monty trusted both of them, and he was right, that they would have taken him if they'd had the opportunity. But he also trusted too much in himself and his own view of the world and the game around him. I mean, that's not really what this rule is about, but, what the heck, we can throw it in there.
Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, I think Monty as a whole played the trust level throughout the whole game quite well. He was he was arm's distance, but still knew them. But I do think what I will say that maybe it might have hurt him a little bit, and I don't know how believable exactly it is, but Terrence did make that mention during the jury segment where he said, or the round table, where he said that he felt that Monty came as a politician to him, it almost felt like, because he didn't feel as close to him and a little disingenuous. And I wonder it was because Monty did such a good job of not really trusting too many people too closely that it hindered his ability to feel others have a feeling of bond with him.
Yeah, I heard that. I had it in my notes. I took it out of my notes because I just don't trust Terrence's read on pretty much anything. So it was like, is that really representative of anything? I don't know. I have no idea. All right. So that covers the 7 rules. We can move into Appendix A, which deals with the all-important, right now, jury phase of the game. And it's about how the players need to plan ahead for making it to Final 2 and how they should work the jury. First, let me say, Taylor was amazing in her responses. And of course, her closing speech was among the best, if not the absolute best that we've ever seen on Big Brother. With that said, and despite what Monty seemed to think as he went into interviews that night, I think she had the votes pretty well locked up even before then. Don't get me wrong. It was still great to see her crush it like that. And even if you have the votes, you can lose them at the end if you screw up. Maybe if Monty had been able to muster any sort of decent answers or speech, then it would have mattered more as well. But based on what we saw, we saw them nodding their heads along. They were already in agreement with her. Also, Turner saying in an interview that the jurors told him they were locked in ahead of time. That wasn't what swayed everyone.
No, it wasn't what swayed everyone from what we are understanding now. However, there's such a thing as closing the deal, with any type of work, company, relationship, whatever it may be. You might be literally 95% right there, but I've had so many situations in life, and I bet you can attest to that, David, that things sometimes just fall apart right at the finish line, and for better or worse. But Taylor did not let that happen. She came prepared, and with that jury speech, which arguably is probably one of the best closing pitches, and I think a lot of people for time will be looking back at that, and this potentially might alter the way pitches are done, when people actually put some more thought into it, not like a "I love you, thank you." Like, it really had some gumption in it. It really had some push, and it really kind of reminded me kind of a Survivor-esque final pitch, because in all Survivor finales, jury things, the players usually have a really strong final pitch, and I love seeing that. So really cool to see that, and honestly gave me goosebumps listening to it.
Oh, yeah. Now, it's funny you bring up Survivor, because the jury questions reminded me of the Survivor 42 jury. Because in Survivor 42, 1 or 2 jurors set up a few things, and the finalists could either fall into a trap or see it for what it was and take advantage. Taylor obviously did the latter here, jumping right in, explaining herself incredibly well every step of the way. She summarized the reasons to vote for her. And even if the jurors hadn't already made up their minds in her favor, I think this would have made several of them stop and think and maybe change their minds. I mean, the way she answered the questions, either she did a great job of anticipating and knowing, okay, if they ask me about this, this is what I'm going to say, or she's just amazing at answering off the cuff, which, having been through pageants for so long, I think she had to do both of those things. Like, what could they ask me? How can I answer it? And she did just a great job in both.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I was going to speak on. And that's was actually what really informed my decision to make her my preseason pick, was her experience in pageantry. And all that, people, I think, have this idea of what pageantry is where it's, these people just go on stage, smile, look pretty. But there's a lot of grueling training that goes into, not from just a fitness part, but specifically from the interview prep. And I only say this now specifically because we have a lot of friends in that world. And Hannah, my partner, she kind of went through that whole road there. And from prep, basically these girls are prepping for 45 days onwards to 6 months on what questions could you be asked. It could be on any current event, from Russia, Ukraine issues to essentially issues in democracy. You need to know anything. You only have about 45 seconds to answer that. So Taylor knew that this could potentially be it. So this was kind of a walk in the park potentially of these questions compared to what she was training for. So I expected her to do well in this situation, and she did really good. Who I didn't expect to do, or who I expected to do a little better than they did, was Monty.
Yeah. I don't think he necessarily fell into any specific traps, which one of the jurors did on Survivor, or one of the finalists did on Survivor. But he did not distinguish himself either. He gave essentially the same answer to like 2 of the 4 questions he was asked. I mean, you only have so much time, and you're repeating yourself, really? And even in that answer, he was using something nobody cared about from the pre-jury. And then he said his biggest move was bringing Taylor, which, I'm sorry, Monty, was clearly not a good move. He needed to come up with something brilliant to counter what Taylor was saying and win people over to his side. But he just thought he had all the numbers and forgot about the importance of words.
Exactly. I mean, it was so strange because here's the thing: is Monty has a great resume, had a great story to also tell, and he didn't tell it. He literally had full agency of the game in the last final 5. The way he moved, he decided what parts would go this way, and he discussed none of that. He didn't talk about him being in control in almost the entirety of the game and making decisions of the game, the puppeteer. He had so much to talk about, and he didn't. It really felt like, again, this is where the hubris came apart, where he felt like he had it in the bag, and from what it seemed like, he phoned these questions in. He didn't think they would matter too much, and he just really phoned it in. And it felt like 2 teams, they tied it up, they went to overtime, and one team just quit, and the other team just was scoring. Because, again, the record was 8-1, but I felt like their resumes and their competition prowess between everything together, they're a lot more evenly stacked. I still think Taylor comes up front, but Monty did such a disservice to his whole game of 85 plus days to describe it the way he did.
I mean, every time you describe that, it reminds me of the Electoral College, because you can barely lose the popular vote. Sometimes you can even win the popular vote and get crushed in the Electoral College. And so in each case, maybe the people could have been like 60% Taylor, 40% Monty.
Yeah.
But they all voted Taylor.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if it was 60-40. It's possible. That's the situation that I'm thinking of that you're describing could have happened. And it looks much worse than it is. But, I think to see this whole picture, we need to move backwards in time to before the actual jury so we could see what got them in this position. Monty told Dalton Ross that he thought everything was working out perfectly, given his resume, the relationships he believed he had in the jury. And I also think he believed his own BS about people not liking Taylor. Obviously, Michael was going to vote for him because he played the best game and he wouldn't side with Taylor. Obviously, Indy liked him better than Taylor. Obviously, his buddy Joseph would side with him instead of Taylor. All of these were huge misreads on his part.
Mm-hmm.
And they caused him to make mistakes like getting rid of two goats because he figured he could beat either Turner or Taylor at the end. So he just needed to get there.
Mm-hmm.
He was half right, but he went in the wrong direction.
No, you're exactly. He thought that these other players needed the goats to take him to the end, without realizing that he would have benefited with them too. This idea, I think, that he completely had his perspective of Taylor, of who she was in the game and how people would perceive it, was so wrong that he was shocked finale night to realize, and probably didn't quite understand, even when the votes landslide came. And this is for my poli-sci nerds, majors, whatever it may be, but essentially Big Brother's winner takes all. Like David said, there's a percentage. I really truly think it could have been a 60-40 split. I feel like some of the jury members might have felt one way or the other, but they're all voting one way or the other, or one specific way. They can't give a percentage of a vote.
Right.
It's not a ranked choice. They put it all on Taylor, and I think there was probably some form of conversation that this season, what we did discuss earlier, that they wanted the winner to be representative of the season as a whole, and they wanted to take pride in that. And I feel like that's something that we're recently seeing a big change in from Big Brother, from really starting from Big Brother 19 onward, is who is your winner? You take pride in that winner, and how does it go? I speak, candidly about my season. I think a lot of us feel some sort of way with our winner of our season and how that kind of casts a shadow of that. And I think moving forward, people really want to make sure that the winner is somebody they can be proud of. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, how the game should be played, but there's a game after the game, and that's how they're thinking of it too. So,
right. Yeah, I mean, like so much about his end game, Monty just overestimated himself and underestimated Taylor. He assumed the jury would be a bunch of GameBot engineers. And I'm allowed to say that because at my heart, I'm a GameBot engineer. But as we've discussed, they weren't going to compare spreadsheets and arrive at an answer. They looked at the overall game much more than Monty did himself. And it was just a huge blind spot for him. It didn't help also that he sent Britney into the jury basically the same way she had sent Indy and Jasmine in, blaming her, scolding her, making her feel terrible. She knew he was lying. She was eager to tell the jury and also to talk up Taylor's game. I think most of them were leaning that way already, but she likely helped things. I do think Britney's impact may have been felt the most while she was still in the house, because she was trying to convince Monty to keep her and kept hammering on what a big threat Turner was to win at the end. Taylor joined in on that. And even Monty said in an interview that they got into his head. And that was part of what helped convince him that Turner was going to be this big threat at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unfortunate. And I think here's the thing, is that if he was able to break it down and look at it in a way that Turner and his game are much more alike in a lot of ways than his and Taylor's game. And even though you might think her undescribables are less than your ability in the game, you don't want to take that chance. You want to go against somebody that you're being rated on the same scale, right? And him and Taylor are rating on different scales of different things they did. So it just, he needed a level of respect for Taylor's game that he didn't have. And so without having that respect for Taylor's game, he wasn't able to see the game she played.
Yeah. Now, Taylor, on the other hand, had been considering jury management for a while and didn't just expect to rely on game statistics. She knew her game stats weren't great. And in part, because she spent so much time with Monte and Turner, she grew to accept their version of how the jury would decide. I think that actually helped her because she realized that if they beat her in those areas, she had to refocus the attention in different areas. And again, I don't think her final speech mattered other than sealing the deal, like you said, in the end. But I do think her other actions in the House showed it as well.
100% agree. I mean, and here's the thing is to say that Taylor also had competition wins under her belt too. And I think that's one thing too. Like she played a very overall strong game. I mean, there's only so many competitions you can win, especially when you have somebody like Michael who's winning. I think about if we break down this, he at least won 50% of the competitions of the whole season. So that takes out the pool there. If we look at the pie chart, Taylor's name is still in there with 2 HOHs, and I think a couple here and there potentially wins. Even if not, she has an overall game that's holistic. It's not like one part was so much stronger. Her social game was amazing, but she still had that competition prowess, maybe not as strong as Monty, but her social game dwarfed his.
Yeah, I mean, she knew that she couldn't compare strict resumes, so she had to look at everything else, and that benefited her. She also worked on jurors through her goodbye messages. She told Dalton Ross that she always made it clear what her intentions and goals were. And she said, quote, "In those videos, I always wanted to make sure that people understood that I was not playing a game based solely on emotion, that I had a larger mission, and that any assumptions they might have about my game was much bigger and likely largely incorrect." I think that helped because between those videos and other interactions Taylor had with several of the players shortly before they left, like Indy and Jasmine, she gave a very good last impression.
I think it's a story to tell. I think she left a very strong, lasting impression. And like many house guests too, they only say that I was fighting for you, I was here for you, I'm really sorry I went this way, and the goodbye messages. She made sure that Jasmine, Indy, every single person walking out of that house knew that, hey, you know what? Like, this is something that the game, it might have to happen, but I still love you. I like you. Jasmine knew that Taylor would never herself try to put her up there. She knew what she was trying to fight for. She respected that, and that's impressive that she was gone so much long ago before Taylor was crowned winner. Between that time and this time, Jasmine still had such a strong, positive feelings towards her. It helped out.
Yeah. Now, moving to Turner, he, of course, didn't make it to final two, but if he had, well, we saw the jury roundtable when they were asked why Turner should win, and they all left. Mention of his supposed moves were countered, as we've already discussed. He sent some people to jury who were naturally going to be against him, like Jasmine and Indy. He could have had some others there who were favorable to him, but he failed, such as the way he completely botched the whole Alyssa situation. As Alyssa told Dalton Ross after being evicted, "He lied to me about it, and he wouldn't just tell me the truth for being his best friend in the house and always having his back. I think I at least deserve to know that he was going to vote me out of his house." While they were still in the game, Turner himself repeatedly said his jury management was terrible. He told Sharon Tharp that he doesn't even know how to get the jury to like you. And that seemed pretty clear.
Yeah, and I think you know what I think him throwing Jasmine and Indy again, not good jury management with them, but I think that his biggest issue was his people that he needed to fight for him in that jury house. He had them turn on him. Michael, he really needed somebody there, and Michael, the type of person, him knowing how analytical, how strong Michael is, and also the power Michael holds in that house will probably be conveyed into the jury house. They're going to listen to him, and sending him there on a really sour note where Michael probably felt the most bitter towards Turner, the way it played out. And then also the same way with Alyssa, the way it played. Those are the two people he needed in that jury house to really fight for him. And again, there might be a lot of scenes we didn't see, but within that jury roundtable, he had no one to fight for him in that side.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Monty, of course, had the opportunity to take Turner in the end, but didn't. And, we can look at that and shake our heads and wonder at how he could have missed that or celebrate because he didn't. But either way, Monty inside the game just didn't see what we saw from the outside. He told Sharon Tharp that he thought Turner had a better resume and it would have been a comparison situation. You mentioned that too. That takes us back to what I've been saying about spreadsheets and charts. He told Dalton Ross he wasn't beating himself up for his decision because their narrative would have been similar, again, what you said, and he thought Turner made the biggest moves in the game. Now, we've discussed already how those weren't really Turner's moves, but a player should have still tried to claim them. What Monty didn't realize was Turner was so busy trying to avoid blame that he therefore avoided taking credit.
Yeah. No, well put. I mean, I think it's a mixture of a very thin line you have to run from trying to hide from credit. But I think in that final five, final four, final three, especially final three, but you need to then take claim and accept your target. You need to accept the target in some shape and form, and so that way you can build credibility in the jury, so you can accept their moves.
Yeah. Now, I do still think Monty should have been able to realize that Turner would be easier to beat. But again, that's because, he didn't, because he just had such a narrow idea of how a winner should be determined. Add up A and B, multiply by X, divide by Y. You get your answer. Whoever had the higher number wins. Boom. But that's not how Big Brother works.
Mm-hmm. A lot of tangibles.
I mean, one part of the math in particular that I don't think Monty considered was that jurors aren't necessarily going to stake a claim and stand their ground. After everything that had gone on, I think, I'm just surmising here, that both Kyle and Terrence decided to do what's happened the whole game, vote with the house. Mm-hmm. When they saw what was going on, because they didn't want to come off as ending the game on an anti-Taylor note after everything that had gone down. I mean, we heard Turner admitted the same thing. He just didn't know which way the vote was going. Mm-hmm. I fully believe those two at least would have voted for Monty if they had seen a majority going that way. But they were not going to stick out like sore thumbs when it was clear that the vote was going, towards Taylor.
No, and I think, there's some conversation too about, from a lot of exit interviews, different things when they had, which I also feel some sort of way that they were asked a lot about Taylor's treatment, which again, I think are valid questions, but I do think maybe not in the terms of it poisoned the jury in certain ways where they knew that they understood what the narrative was being. Mm-hmm. And so then someone like Kyle, for example, who is literally coming off the game, knowing that he has to build up his reputation, is he now going to, when he has the option to go against the grain and not vote for Taylor, right, he's probably going to, not saying that she doesn't deserve it by any means, but Kyle and Terrence, I would have put a lot more clout in them voting for Monty.
And everybody would have. I mean, that surprised everybody. It surprised Taylor. It surprised Monty. Yeah. And I think the reason is, like we said, you've got the delegates at the electoral convention there, mm-hmm, and they're like, come this way. This is the way the vote's going.
You're not going to get funding if you don't vote this way. So, yeah.
All right. Well, after an hour and 45 minutes, it is about time to wrap things up. What are your final thoughts about Taylor, Monty, and Turner?
You know what? I'm going to speak about them and essentially the season as a whole. I think what a roller coaster of a season. And if I think of three players that were pivotal to the season, it was both Turner, Monty, and Taylor. From her roller coaster of a journey from up and down to essentially not starting any lower than you potentially could in the Big Brother season. She started from a very low point, from no fault of her own, honestly, and is really raised to be the queen of the Ashes. Was a delight to see her in and out. Not to say her game was without flaws, but I think we saw a really interesting game where social prowess was the emphasis, where we'll continue to see this impact how the game will eventually be played. To both Monty and Turner, both won competition, well players, good entertainment. But what I also like to see was that it was very fluid. They were both fluid in the way they played the game. I don't think anyone, aside from Daniel, can say this was a boring season by any means. And it was because of these three players who were dynamic, knew when to turn, had different competition. So I'm really happy that we saw this final three here. Great part of it. And kudos to all these players. I think they're very above average players by any means and high up there. Put them in any season, I think they excel.
All right. I'm going to have a little bit more to say than that, as you might expect. Now,
go for it.
In the end, Big Brother is a numbers game in that you always have to have the numbers on your side for eviction votes. It helps to have a lot of numbers on your side for your alliances, and you need numbers in the jury to win it all. Turner wasn't sure he had the numbers in the jury, but thought he at least had Monty as his number to take him to final two. He didn't, but even if he had, he would have lost there because he let others run the game for him. He was more concerned with doing what other people wanted, and even then he didn't take credit for it because he didn't want, quote, blood on his hands. Some people in the jury didn't like him. Others didn't respect his game. As I mentioned earlier, Turner told Julie he believed having, quote, too many big moves was what got him evicted. And I suppose in a way he was right because Monty was the one making the decision, and he did indeed see everything as numbers. He took that idea too far and seemed to think it was literally all just a comparison of equations and scorecards. Throughout the season, he showed difficulty thinking outside of his own box, and that continued into the finale, leading him to take Taylor to the end because he believed she would be easier to beat based on the math of the situation and also based on being a little too high on his own supply. He had a blind spot that covered where he stood, where Taylor stood, and what people were actually looking for. And he just thought the math would speak for itself. Even Taylor didn't feel like she had a real chance because she'd been so immersed in the same concepts being pushed by Monte and Turner, where worth in the game was defined by comp wins and big moves. She expected certain of the superfans to vote according to those metrics. And since I am someone who typically fits this mold, I reflected on it myself. But as I've said many, many times, big moves are not the definition of a good player. Comp wins are not the definition of a good player. Good gameplay takes place over the course of the season. The smaller moves, putting yourself into good positions, taking advantage of mistakes made by others. Taylor did all those things. As I mentioned earlier, Taylor said, I just didn't think that a journey was going to be anything worth overcoming or pitching to a journey. But that story did indeed resonate with the jury, not to mention viewers. Was Taylor ever, quote, running the game? No, but you don't have to run the game to win the game. As she also said, perseverance and resiliency is also a way to win this game. It doesn't have to be the biggest move that's visible and tangible. It doesn't have to be the biggest betrayal that happens in the game. And she was right. Big Brother 24 started out with some people hating on Taylor for absolutely no good reason. As we've discussed with each passing week here, one by one, those people were sent packing, most before the jury. As she said in response to her final question, I am the blockbuster. If you sit next to me, you are going home. And that happened because of her strategy, her social game, her flexibility, her emotional control, and more. She was not a shield. She was a sword. She was not a victim. She was the victor. And that is why Taylor won and Monte and Turner lost.
I will always say, David Bloomer, I hope you live to be like 150 because I don't want to die anytime soon. But when I die, I need you at my eulogy. I just like, or if you know the day's coming, just start recording something because it's getting played on my tombstone. It's going to be like finger touch, boom. I mean, well said. I don't think anyone could have put it better than that. Wonderful. And I mean, I hope Taylor gets to see that.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And, I mean, using Taylor's words definitely helped. I could take from what she said, especially at the end there. Now, so yeah, that may be our last word on it, but I do want to mention that it's possible we may have a season wrap-up podcast in a week or so. We really aren't sure about it. We need to make sure we have things to talk about beyond what we just talked about. So if anyone has questions they'd like us to answer about the season, the players, the rules, whatever, send them in. We'll see if we have enough, to put together. In the meantime, of course, I will be back with Jessica Lewis this weekend to discuss why the second player gets voted out as survivor. And then she and I will continue from there as I only cover one show. And don't have live feeds and stuff to go off of.
And don't forget, as always, we're very active on several different social medias where you guys have been absolutely amazing on. We've been discussing Big Brother, Survivor, etc. On Twitter, you can find me at the Ovi Kabir and David at David Bloomberg. We're both on TikTok, where our residential TikTok influencer is pushing out a lot of Survivor content. His name is at David_Bloomberg, and I am at Basmati Boy. And lately, we've been also cross-posting anything from TikTok over to Instagram. So you can find David at david.e.bloomberg and me at Ovi Kabir. Again, this has been such an incredible season to kind of discuss with you, David, with you guys here. We loved having you guys comment different things on YouTube, the comments, Twitter, Instagram. Because of your comments, I got myself kind of a mic right here. So hopefully my voice is better these last few times. We'll invest in a better mic for when we record this again. And don't let the conversation stop here. If you want to wrap up video of us talking a little bit more of some topics you want to about Big Brother, let us know in the comments. And if we get enough people talking about it, I'll come out of my cave, I'll drag David out, and we'll do another one of these. So
That's
again,
right.
Thank you so much for watching.
That's right. Now, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhaswebsite.com/patron. You can get access to multiple patron-only podcasts, as we're moving into Survivor, just a whole bunch of things. And when Rob isn't talking directly to everyone, there are the Facebook groups and Discord to keep people occupied. So again, you can become a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron, or click on our robhasawebsite.com/YX Lost feed. Of course, on that page, you can also get the Survivor version of the poster. You can get the t-shirt. You can get the checklist t-shirt. You can get the mug, all those things that we talked about earlier. The other thing that I want to mention is that everyone should make sure you're subscribed, especially as we head into the Survivor season, to all of the RHAP podcasts. Again, you could do it at our YX Lost feed. There's a link there. Get all the content there. And because it's the start of many new reality TV seasons, by subscribing, Rob will donate $2 for every new subscriber to the Boys and Girls Club. Remember, subscribing is free, and you'll be supporting a great cause. Rob and Nicole selected the Boys and Girls Club, whose goal it is to provide safe spaces, life-enhancing programs, and mentorship to help support and empower all kids to live up to their full potential. So if you're already subscribed, recommend it to a friend. So you can either click on the link that I mentioned or robhasawebsite.com/subscribe. With that, I want to thank Scott St. Pierre for any editing done to this podcast, Will for America for the theme song. Ovi, thanks especially to you for joining me all season. This really has been fun. You have provided a lot of great insight. It's not just me saying that. I have heard it from, comments from other podcasters. So we really appreciate that.
Hey, David, thank you so much. If you ever need your local brown boy who hit pre-jury back here, I'm happy to be here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. It's been so much fun, and I can't wait to hopefully cover Big Brother again alongside David Bloomberg down in the future.
Yes, let's hope so. All right, we will see you then, and I will see everyone just in a few days for Survivor. Bye.